At Thanksgiving dinner, my mother said, "You'll always be the family's biggest disappointment." My aunt chuckled. I pretended not to cry. This morning, they woke up to find their bank accounts frozen, by me. Last Thanksgiving, my mom told me I'd always be the family's biggest disappointment. My aunt laughed along with her. I didn't cry in front of them, but I went to my room afterward and lost it. The thing is, I wasn't just sitting there feeling sorry for myself. I had a plan. This morning, they woke up to find their bank accounts frozen. And the best part? I was the one who did it. Now I'm just trying to figure out how to handle the fallout. I never looked forward to family holidays. Thanksgiving had become just another reminder that I was the odd one out, the one who couldn't seem to do anything right in my family's eyes. My name is Zoe, and for years I've been stuck under the weight of my mother's constant disappointment. This Thanksgiving was supposed to be no different. I was back home in Boise after my divorce, living in my childhood bedroom because I didn't have anywhere else to go. My mother, Carolyn, had made it very clear that my return was more of a necessity than a welcome. As usual, Thanksgiving dinner was at my parents' house. There were turkey and mashed potatoes and all the trimmings, but the atmosphere was thick, like everyone was holding their breath, waiting for something to go wrong. The usual suspects were all there: my Aunt Jeanette, who always had something snarky to say, and my cousin Margaret, who tried so hard to be the perfect child. Every time I walked into the kitchen, they smiled at me, but it was a smile that never reached their eyes. I'd spent the morning getting everything ready for dinner, hoping that at least this one holiday would pass without too much emotional baggage. But of course, my mom had other plans. She never could just leave things alone. "Zoe, you've hardly said a word," my mom remarked as I put the last few dishes on the table. "I'm just thinking about how everything's coming together," I replied, trying to keep it casual. I wasn't in the mood for another lecture on how I wasn't doing enough with my life, but that's exactly what I was bracing for. My Aunt Jeanette, sitting at the table with her cup of coffee, threw me a sideways glance. "Well, you should be thinking about your future," she said, her voice as dry as the turkey I was sure she was about to criticize. "Can't keep living off your mom forever, Zoe. At some point, you have to pull yourself together." I didn't bother replying. Jeanette had always had this way of putting me down without ever really saying anything concrete. It was like she enjoyed making me feel small. Dinner went on in its usual monotony: awkward silence, forced laughter, and the occasional outburst from Jeanette or my mom about one thing or another. But then came the moment that would change everything. I was halfway through my mashed potatoes when my mother looked at me from across the table and said, in her flat, uncaring tone, "You know, Zoe, you'll always be the family's biggest disappointment." The words hit me like a slap, even though I should have been used to them by now. My Aunt Jeanette snickered behind her coffee cup, like she always did when my mother aimed her sharp words at me. They had no idea how much those words hurt. But I wasn't going to show it. I wasn't going to cry in front of them again. I kept my eyes on my plate, pretending to focus on my food, pretending it didn't bother me. My chest tightened, but I swallowed the lump in my throat. My mom didn't get it. She never did. She didn't see how much her words crushed me every time. She had this way of making everything my fault. My failed marriage. My lack of a career. My disappointment of a life. It was easier for her to blame me than to face the reality that she wasn't perfect either. "Well, that's a little harsh, Carolyn," Jeanette chimed in, her voice dripping with sarcasm. "But she's right, you know. Zoe has always been a little off. Can't quite put it together." I felt a sharp pain in my chest, but I didn't let it show. I didn't want them to see how much they were getting to me. I pushed my chair back from the table and stood up. "I'm going to take a walk," I muttered, barely making eye contact. I couldn't stay there another second. As soon as I got to my room, I slammed the door behind me and locked it. The tears came, finally, but I wasn't about to sit there and wallow. No. I had done enough of that in the past. I'd spent so many years believing that their words were true, that I was a disappointment. But something shifted in me that night. Maybe it was the years of taking their judgment and never fighting back. Maybe it was just the accumulation of years of hurt. But in that moment, I realized I didn't have to keep taking it. I didn't have to sit there and let them crush me anymore. I took a deep breath and wiped my eyes. There was a way out. There was a way to make them see that I wasn't just a pushover, that I wasn't just their punching bag. I didn't need their approval. I didn't need anything from them. I had been planning this for weeks, if not months. It wasn't just about revenge, it was about taking back control. I had learned about how to manipulate finances, how to move money around without detection. It wasn't hard once you knew what you were doing. And my mom's obsession with money was my key to making sure they understood exactly who I was now. The next morning, I spent hours getting everything just right. I had already gained access to their accounts over the past few weeks. Little by little, I'd gained the information I needed. It wasn't hard. They were so careless with their passwords and accounts, always assuming that they were untouchable. Well, they weren't. I started with my mom. I logged into her bank account, transferred a large portion of her savings into a temporary holding account, and then froze the rest of her assets. Next was Jeanette. She thought she was above it all, always mocking me, always acting like I was the one who couldn't manage anything. I froze her accounts next. Then I moved on to Margaret, my cousin, who had just started her perfect life with her husband and her new house. She didn't know it yet, but her financial world was about to come crashing down. When I was done, I sat back, staring at the screen. I felt a strange sense of calm. I wasn't the victim anymore. I wasn't the disappointment. I was in control. I waited for them to wake up and start their day, knowing they'd be clueless about what had just happened. The chaos would come soon enough. I didn't expect them to call me. I didn't expect them to come to me for help, but I knew it was coming. They would be desperate, panicked, and confused. And I would watch it all unfold from the comfort of my room, knowing that for the first time in my life, I had done something that would make them finally see me. I wasn't invisible anymore. The first sign that something was wrong came around 9 a.m. when I heard my mother's voice raised in frustration from the kitchen. I could hear her pace, the clinking of her coffee mug being set down a little too forcefully. "What the heck is going on?" she shouted. "My card isn't working." I held my breath for a moment, staring at my phone screen. The notifications came in as I had anticipated: account alerts, transaction denials, balance updates. I didn't even need to check. I already knew the chaos was unfolding, and I couldn't help but feel a small spark of satisfaction. But as the morning went on, I began to notice something I hadn't planned for: the sheer panic in their voices. It wasn't just a financial inconvenience anymore, it was a personal attack. The realization slowly crept in that they were utterly powerless, unable to get their hands on the money they relied on. I could hear them through the thin walls, desperate whispers as they made calls to the bank, trying to figure out what happened. Jeanette, of course, was the first to storm up the stairs to my room. She knocked 3 times, each knock more insistent than the last. I had no doubt she was coming to demand answers, to accuse me. But part of me knew that this was inevitable. They were going to have to face the consequences of their dismissiveness and their cruelty. When I opened the door, she didn't waste time. "Zoe," she hissed, her face flushed with anger. "What did you do? We can't access any of our accounts." "What the heck did you do?" I didn't flinch. I didn't even let a smile slip. I simply stood there, arms crossed, looking at her. It felt like the first time in years that I'd felt truly calm, truly in control. "I don't know what you're talking about, Jeanette," I said, my voice even. "Maybe you should call your bank and figure it out." Her eyes narrowed, but there was something in her expression, something almost calculating, as if she were trying to read me, trying to understand why I was so detached. But she didn't get it. She never would. "You're a real piece of work, you know that?" Jeanette snapped, but I could see the slight tremor in her hand as she reached for her phone again, dialing rapidly. She was rattled. She was scared. And that, in some twisted way, made me feel powerful. I watched as she stormed down the hallway, likely headed back downstairs to rejoin the others, but my thoughts were already elsewhere. I thought about how many years I had spent feeling like I didn't matter. Like I was less than the rest of them. My mom's constant disappointment, Jeanette's mocking laughter, Margaret's passive-aggressive jabs, all of them had made it clear that I was always the problem. But now, for the first time, I realized that maybe I didn't have to be the victim anymore. Maybe it was time for them to feel what I'd been feeling for all these years. I didn't expect them to come to me for help, at least, not directly. But the panic, the confusion, it would build up. They would figure out that they couldn't just bypass the system. They would be forced to confront the reality that they didn't hold all the power anymore. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mom. "Zoe, you need to come downstairs. Now." I took a deep breath. Here it was. The reckoning. They were finally going to confront me. Or at least, they were going to try to. When I made my way downstairs, I found my mom sitting at the kitchen table, staring at her phone screen like it had personally betrayed her. She looked up when she saw me, her face pale and tense. "Zoe," she said, her voice trembling. "What is going on? I can't get into my account. I've been calling all morning, and they're saying there's nothing they can do. Why are you doing this?" I sat down at the table across from her, trying to keep my expression neutral. I didn't want her to see the satisfaction creeping into my features. "I don't know, Mom. Maybe you should try calling your bank again." She wasn't buying it. Her eyes were narrowed, her lips tight. "Don't play dumb with me. You know exactly what's going on." I took a slow breath, then finally said, "Well, if you're asking if I'm responsible, I'll just say this: you've never really cared about me. I'm always the disappointment in your eyes. You've spent my entire life making me feel small, making me feel like I'm not enough. And this is the only way I could make you see me. I'm done being your punching bag." For a moment, there was silence. Her eyes flickered with a mix of disbelief and anger. But instead of yelling at me, like I expected, she just stared at me. "You've lost your mind, Zoe. You're seriously going to ruin your life over this?" I shook my head. "I'm not ruining my life, Mom. I'm just taking control for once. Maybe you should try it." Her hand trembled slightly as she picked up her phone again, tapping at the screen in frustration. I didn't care. I was done caring. I thought the worst would be over after my confrontation with my mom, but things only escalated from there. Jeanette was relentless, texting me at all hours, trying to talk it out, though I knew full well that she wasn't interested in understanding me. She wanted answers. She wanted to know why I'd done what I'd done. But I didn't owe her or anyone else an explanation. The real fallout came a few days later when they realized the full extent of what I had done. The bank accounts weren't just frozen, they were emptied. All of their money was gone. Every last cent, transferred into an untraceable account I had set up for myself. I felt the guilt weigh on me at first, but only for a moment. I knew what they would say: I was ruining my life, I was being petty, I was crossing a line. But for the first time, I didn't care what they thought. It was my turn. My turn to have a voice, to stand up for myself in a way that would finally make them see me. I wasn't the family's disappointment anymore. I was the one calling the shots. And as the days passed, as I watched them scramble to fix what I had broken, I started to feel something I hadn't felt in years: peace. I wasn't their doormat anymore. I wasn't their punching bag. I wasn't their problem to solve. For once, the tables had turned. And I was in control. But I knew I hadn't heard the last from them yet. The confrontation would come. The questions, the accusations, the anger, it was inevitable. But I was ready. Ready to stand my ground. And deep down, I knew that I wasn't going to back down. Not this time. The following days were a blur of frantic calls, angry texts, and strained conversations. My mom, Jeanette, and even Margaret kept reaching out, trying to fix things. They weren't just angry at me. They were scared. For the first time in their lives, they were powerless, and that terrified them. I stayed quiet most of the time. I didn't need to explain myself further. The silence was my answer. Each time my phone buzzed, I checked the messages and ignored the calls. It felt strangely liberating to not be at their beck and call anymore. The frantic demands for my help, the desperate pleas to fix their accounts, it was all so familiar. It was always like this with them. They expected me to be their problem solver, to clean up the messes they created, to take care of everything. But not this time. My mom came over to my room the night after I'd frozen their accounts. She knocked hesitantly, and I could hear the soft click of her shoes on the wooden floor as she paced outside my door before finally taking a breath and knocking once more. "Zoe," she said, her voice low, softer than I'd heard it in a long time. "We need to talk." I didn't answer immediately, letting the silence hang between us. I wanted her to feel the weight of what had happened, the distance I'd put between us. Finally, I opened the door, and there she stood, her face a mixture of exhaustion and frustration, her eyes pleading for something. But I wasn't sure what she wanted anymore. The anger that had been there earlier was gone, replaced with something more desperate, more vulnerable. I didn't know if that made it better or worse. "What's done is done, Mom," I said, leaning against the doorframe, arms crossed. "I'm not going to undo it." She opened her mouth as if to argue, but then paused, running a hand through her hair. She wasn't sure what to say next. She wasn't sure how to fix it. "Zoe, I didn't mean what I said. About you being a disappointment." Her voice cracked slightly. I was frustrated. And sometimes I don't know how to handle everything. But I didn't mean to hurt you. I could tell she was being sincere, or at least trying to be. But I had heard these apologies before. They came too late, after the damage had been done. She had spent my entire life making me feel like I wasn't enough, and then, only when the situation was out of her control, did she try to mend things with a few words. I wasn't going to fall for it again. "I don't need your apologies, Mom," I replied flatly. "You don't get to say those things and expect everything to go back to normal. You don't get to tell me I'm a disappointment and then expect me to come running when you've messed up." She sighed, her shoulders slumping as she looked at me with a mix of sadness and guilt. "I don't know what else to say. I'm sorry for how I've treated you over the years. But I need your help, Zoe. The bank won't do anything without you. I don't know who else to turn to." I looked her over, trying to read her. I saw the tears forming in her eyes, but I didn't feel any sympathy. Maybe I should have. Maybe I should have been the bigger person and just fixed everything for her. But I had already spent my life trying to be the person she wanted me to be, trying to be what she needed, trying to make everything right. And look where it got me. She wasn't the one who had to pick up the pieces of my shattered marriage. She wasn't the one who had to face the harsh reality of being alone after all these years. "No," I said firmly. "I'm not fixing this for you. You and Jeanette have never respected me. You've never even tried to understand what it's been like for me, and now that I've done something for myself, you want me to fix it for you?" "No." She didn't argue. Instead, she turned and walked away, leaving me standing there, still feeling the weight of the words she had said earlier. There was a part of me that was angry, but there was also part of me that felt something like satisfaction. I was making a choice for myself, finally. No more bending to their whims. No more being the family's scapegoat. Over the next few days, the tension in the house was palpable. It was clear that they were struggling to figure out how to get the money back. They tried contacting their banks, but they were getting nowhere. I had set everything up in a way that no one could trace it. The accounts were locked down tight, and I knew there was no way they'd get the funds back unless I allowed it. Jeanette sent me a text that night, something terse and almost pleading. "Zoe, we need to talk. Please. We can fix this, but you have to help us." I ignored it. And then came the moment I was dreading, but also anticipating. My aunt, Jeanette, walked into my room the next morning, her face pinched with frustration, and I could tell she was about to snap. "What the heck, Zoe," she spat, throwing her phone on my bed, the screen cracked and showing the message from the bank. "What did you do to us? You can't just steal our money like this. This is serious. You can't just freeze our entire lives like this." I sat up, leaning against my desk, arms folded. "You think I don't know what I did? I did it for a reason. You've never once respected me. You've treated me like I was less than everyone else. But this time I'm done letting you walk all over me." Her eyes flickered with something between anger and disbelief. She opened her mouth to argue, but I cut her off. "You've spent years making me feel small, like nothing I did mattered. You and Mom have been on this constant mission to remind me that I'm a failure. Well, I'm not doing it anymore. I'm not your problem to fix. You both need to face the consequences of your actions for once." Jeanette stood there, silent for a long moment, her jaw tightening. Finally, she spoke, her voice low. "This isn't you, Zoe. You're not this person. You're not a criminal. I'm not a criminal. I'm just done being the one who always gets hurt," I said, the words coming out sharper than I meant. "You and Mom will figure this out. I'm not your solution anymore." With that, she left, slamming the door behind her. I heard her muttering to herself as she walked down the hall. The rest of the day was filled with tense silence, punctuated by the occasional phone call or shouted argument downstairs. But it didn't matter. I had made my stand, and there was no going back. It wasn't long before they tried again, asking me to reverse everything. But I had already made up my mind. They would never change. They would never see me for who I truly was until they were forced to. And I was willing to make them see, even if it meant tearing down the last remnants of what our family had once been. I wasn't their disappointment anymore. The days that followed were filled with a tense, almost suffocating silence. My family didn't know how to act around me anymore. They tried to continue as if nothing had happened, but I could see the cracks forming. Jeanette spent most of her time on the phone, and I could hear her voice, growing more frantic with every call. My mom was quieter than usual, her gaze distant, lost in thought. The truth was, they didn't know what to do without their money, without their control. I could tell that they were beginning to understand that they were powerless, no one could bail them out. No amount of apologies or explanations would fix what had happened. And deep down, I knew that they were starting to see me in a new light. Not as their punching bag. Not as the disappointment. But as someone who had finally taken control, someone who wasn't afraid to stand up for herself anymore. I never intended to ruin their lives completely. My revenge was never about causing them financial ruin. It was about forcing them to see me. To recognize my worth. And that, I realized, was the most satisfying part of it all. They had spent so many years dismissing me, belittling me, treating me as the problem in the family, and now they couldn't do anything without me. For the first time, I was the one with the power. I hadn't been heartless, though. After the shock had settled, I gave them one final chance. I knew it would be difficult for them to admit they needed me, but if they truly wanted to get their accounts back, they would have to humble themselves. They would have to admit that they had been wrong about me. They would have to own up to their behavior. It was early morning when I finally sent the message. "I'll restore your accounts. But only if you're willing to accept that I'm not the failure you think I am. That I'm not someone you can walk all over anymore." The message was brief, but it was the final test. I knew they wouldn't be happy about it, but I also knew that if they wanted things to go back to normal, they would have to be willing to change. The old Zoe, the one who would have immediately fixed everything without question, was gone. She didn't exist anymore. It took an hour for the first response to come in. It was my mom. "Zoe, I'm sorry. I don't know what to say, but you're right. I've treated you badly. And I don't know how to fix it, but I want to try. I'm sorry for everything. For all the years of hurt. You don't deserve that. I'll do whatever it takes to make it right. That was all it took. I felt a mix of relief and satisfaction wash over me. I didn't expect an apology from Jeanette, she would never give me that. But my mom had at least acknowledged her wrongs. That, in itself, was a huge step forward. I sat there, staring at the screen, processing her words. It wasn't perfect. It wasn't enough to erase the years of hurt. But it was something. And that something was a start. I stood up from my desk, feeling more empowered than I had in a long time. I reached for my phone, logged into the accounts one last time, and with a few quick taps, I unlocked them. The funds that had been sitting in a holding account were transferred back to their rightful places. It was all I was going to do. I wasn't going to fix every little thing they'd screwed up. I wasn't going to erase the years of neglect and hurt they'd caused. But I was giving them a chance to rebuild. And that, in my eyes, was more than enough. The next day, when I saw my mom again, she was different. She wasn't perfect, and we still had a long way to go, but there was a sense of understanding in her eyes that hadn't been there before. I know I've messed up, she said quietly, her voice a little shaky. But I don't want to lose you, Zoe. I don't want to keep pretending that you're not part of this family. I've been so focused on everything else, I forgot about what matters most. I didn't say anything at first. I just let her words sink in. This wasn't a complete fix. There was no magic apology that could make everything right, but it was a start. It was a shift in perspective, a change I never thought I'd see. Jeanette came around later, her usual sharp tone muted, but still filled with that same bitterness. I don't get it, she said, pacing around the living room. I don't get why you're doing this. You could have just told us to fix it. You didn't have to go this far. I didn't go far enough, I said quietly. You both needed to understand how it felt to be overlooked, to be dismissed. I needed to show you that I'm not just the person you've always assumed I am. Jeanette looked like she wanted to argue, but instead, she sighed deeply, almost resigned. Maybe you're right. Maybe we've been wrong. But this whole thing is over, right? I didn't answer her right away. I didn't need to. This wasn't about them. This was about me, finally getting the respect I deserved. I'm done being the family disappointment, I said softly. And if you want to keep me in your life, you'll have to learn to respect me. You don't get to treat me like nothing anymore. The rest of the family had to work through their own embarrassment and frustration. The money was back, but the damage had already been done. They had seen me, finally, for who I was, not just their burden, not just the failure they had always painted me to be. And I knew they wouldn't forget it. Not for a long time. As for me, I didn't need their approval anymore. I didn't need to prove myself to them. For the first time in my life, I was enough. Not because they said I was, but because I finally believed it myself. The days that followed were quieter. I didn't hear from my mom or Jeanette as much as I expected, but I knew they were processing everything that had happened. My phone buzzed with a text from my mom a few weeks later. It was simple, but it was enough. Zoe, I just wanted to say thank you for what you did. You showed me something I've never seen before. I'm proud of you, even if I didn't know how to show it before. I didn't respond right away. I didn't need to. I knew things weren't perfect, but they didn't need to be. I wasn't the family's disappointment anymore. I was finally free. And that, to me, was more than enough.